Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're very grateful to have you all with us here today, and we're very grateful to have Noel Kok joining us from NEWF. And before I hand over to him, we just have one or two housekeeping items to run through. This is our last webinar for 2022, but there will be another webinar in the series taking place in late January. So you're welcome to register for that one so long. The link to register is available on the events page. Then if you have any questions or queries, please feel free to reach out to us at webinars@sstafrica.org.za. And so for now, I'm going to hand over to Noel, who is a producer, creative director, and National Geographic explorer. So we're very excited to hear what he has to share with us today. Noel, over to you when you're ready.
All right, can you hear me?
Perfectly, thanks.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. When I saw your invite, it's in the middle of an absolutely crazy schedule, but I think it's really important. The topic particularly is really important in terms of education and storytelling, and particularly with the focus on the environment and plastic pollution. I think all of those topics are close to my heart, but particularly education and storytelling. And is there an intersection? Is there what's the importance? Why? And how does that impact the environment? And then also with regards to plastic pollution, what is being done, what is the story about that, etc. So, looking at all of that, I think that's what immediately attracted me to saying, okay, let me participate in this, no matter how crazy the schedule is. And so I just once again want to thank you for the invitation. To start off, I think I need to introduce who we are as an organization. So I am the executive director at the organization NEWF. I'm responsible for partnerships and programs. And NEWF stands for Nature Environment and Wildlife Filmmakers. We are an organization that was established in 2017. And why were we established? I think for two primary reasons, okay? One, to change the narrative that exists in Africa that Africans are a continent made up of, and the narrative that exists in nature and wildlife storytelling particularly, and conservation storytelling particularly, that Africa is a continent made up of rangers, guides, poachers, pirates, and people who sing for you when you jump off your safari vehicle. That couldn't be further from the truth. Okay, and then the second important reason is that the world uses so much of Africa's nature and wildlife, yet Black African storytellers were rarer than most of the species conservationists were trying to save on this continent. And so for those two particular reasons, we decided to start an organization that what started out initially was that we were going to bring everybody on the continent together to discuss the issues of storytelling around nature and wildlife, to discuss the issues around conservation storytelling, and to see how we could change those two particular narratives and those particular issues. We were established in 2017, as I explained, and what started out as an annual Congress. Initially, there was a lot of debate as to whether we should be a Congress or whether we should be a film festival. And when we thought about being a film festival, we again thought, hold on, whose films would we show? Because Africans particularly were not making this, or not featuring or making the stories of nature and wildlife on the continent. And so we decided that we'd be a Congress so that we could tackle some of the critical issues around storytelling, nature and wildlife and conservation storytelling in Africa, and particularly to contribute towards the transformation of that particular genre of storytelling on the continent. In 2018, and coming to today's topic around plastic pollution, particularly with regards to the ocean, and particularly since today's webinar is held by the Sustainable Seas Trust, we are particularly talking about the ocean today. And so in 2018, if you look at Africa, actually it's right here behind me. If you look at Africa, Africa is a continent that is, hold on one second, I'm trying to share my screen. There we go. For those of you from the NEWF community that are here, you will know that this normally takes me a while. There we go.
It is up, we can see it.
There we go.
And it's in full screen. Wonderful.
Fantastic. Oops. There we go. And so the topic of today's talk is we can't save what we can't see. And so just to backtrack a little bit before I go into what happened back in 2018. The topic of today's talk is we can't save what we can't see. And where this came about from was back in 2018, when we were preparing for NEWF Congress 2018. Africa is a continent surrounded by over 30,000 kilometers of coastline. 38 of the 54 countries in Africa have a coastline. And when we were planning this Congress, we naturally assumed that we would put together a panel that included Black African underwater storytellers or filmmakers, because obviously the event was taking place in Africa. To our shock and horror, we searched all across the continent. After 3 months, I'm sure we would have found more if we looked. After 3 months, we eventually found one Black African underwater storyteller in Kenya, and even he, when we approached him, said, "Listen, I'm not I'm not at the level yet where I believe I can be. I don't have access to all the gear, etc." But we invited him. We were really excited about it. But the lesson, particularly that we learned during that quest, during that search for a storyteller to join that panel, was that there were two things we learned. One, that access was actually a bigger problem or challenge than us trying to convene once a year and bring everybody together and we talk about problems and we all go off singing Kumbaya into the distance. The bigger challenges that we were facing was access and the barriers to entry, because how was it even possible that on a continent with so much coastline that there wasn't a Black African underwater filmmaker just readily available? Number one. Number two, what shocked us even further was as we were looking for somebody to put on this panel, we came across so many Black African marine biologists. Again, what was absolutely scary was that most of them that we came across, almost all of them that we came across, could not dive. And so many of them couldn't even swim. And we're like, hold on. If one looks now at the education part, okay, how is it even possible that we have all these marine biologists graduating from all the universities across Africa, yet they can't swim, let alone dive? And coming back to a lot of these marine biologists are scientists. 90%, 99% of them are conservationists. And so coming back to the topic of my talk, or the heading of my talk, we can't save what we can't see. How were we expecting these marine biologists to be inspired and motivated conservationists? How were we expecting them to really be able to relate and make their science relatable and be able to connect with what they were studying and be able to take that back to the places or to the areas that they grew up in or to the communities that lived around the ocean? it was absolutely crazy to find this out. And so our response was, okay, in addition to hosting and convening this Congress, we need to do something, number one, to break down the barriers and to create access for filmmakers. And if you're going to tell nature and wildlife and conservation and science stories, you cannot separate the conservation and the science from the storytelling. It is factual. We're not making fiction films under, in terms of natural history. Sometimes I think some people would like us to. That's a discussion for another day. But you could not separate the two. And so one of the key things that we do as an organization is try to connect scientists and storytellers. And so we looked at this and we thought, okay, we've got to create the access for both scientists and storytellers and bring them together so that we can start telling the stories of Africa, that we can start inspiring the communities that live around the oceans to protect the oceans. I'm going to come back to the issue of plastic solution a little bit later, and I'll talk about that through a story that I want to tell you. But as I said, Africa is surrounded by over 30,000 kilometers of coastline, and 38 of the 54 countries of Africa have a coastline. So there must be a wealth of stories that are out there. So in response to all of this, we established what we call NEWF dive labs. And the idea with NEWF dive labs, again, like I said, was to match scientists and storytellers, pay for them to do to get the dive qualifications, because we found out that, okay, one, learning how to swim, the cost of diving was so prohibitive and so, out of this, crazy in terms of cost. How would the majority of Black Africans be able to afford it? Or how would the majority of young Africans be able to afford it? What we then also found is in the rest of Africa, other than South Africa particularly, South Africa is very lucky in that we have a very strong domestic dive market. And so a lot of our prices are aimed towards that domestic market. But in the rest of Africa, the dive markets in the rest of Africa are aimed at tourists and international tourists. So the costs are almost double what they are here in South Africa. So that becomes even more prohibitive for the rest of Africa. And so we decided as an organization that we were going to raise funding to get money to qualify young storytellers and scientists and bring them together and get them the dive qualifications so that they can start or get inspired to tell stories about the ocean. This is a picture of our very first dive lab. A number of the fellows in this picture have gone on to make films about the ocean. Some of them have gone on to make films about the oceans, including the scientists. Some of them have gone on to make their first films. Most of them are still, almost all of them are still in the industry and doing fairly well. And we're really excited in terms of where they have gone. One of them, Jamila Jannah on the left, is a scientist. She is earmarked to join our Dive Master lab in January next year. But this is the second dive lab that we did. And one of the outcomes of this lab was that it was over the period of a month, and they were tasked to, and these were more experienced filmmakers who've been in the industry a number of years, experienced producers, editors, cinematographers, and they were tasked to develop a concept of something that inspired them under the water, and to, as they were learning how to dive, and to film it and then to edit it into a short film. That film is called Pefumla. It has won a number of awards. I believe it's also one of the films that we will make available to everybody to watch, and we'll also make it available on the webinar afterwards, on the YouTube channel as well afterwards. This is a beautiful shot of some perfect buoyancy, I believe, you know, and then this is our dive master lab. This is 10 scientists and storytellers who came through to Sodwana Bay in the middle of COVID, I might add, at the beginning of April last year. And in 3 months, they were tasked to become dive masters. And why dive masters, one would ask. What we found with the first 2 labs is that whilst we were creating these opportunities and creating these opportunities of dive qualifications for our fellows, very often they were not going back to dive on their own, because again, and so this is, we started realizing that the issue of access remained a problem, even though we had created this opportunity in terms of some of the dive qualifications. And there's a number of reasons around this. One, a lot of those dive areas are remote. You need accommodation, you need transport. The costs, again, are prohibitive. To hire gear, all of that, the costs are prohibitive. Also, there aren't that many Black African divers, recreational divers. And so culturally, you're struggling to find somebody to join you, or a crew, or a group of friends to join you to go and dive. And so we looked at this issue of access again. And what came about was that one of the solutions that we suggested was, we looked at the industry and we said, okay, if you become a dive master, you could lead the dives, the research dives at your university. You could, some dive operators are inclined to give you free dives because you can lead some of the dives. You could take this qualification and go and work anywhere in the world. And so we looked at this dive master qualification as one of the things that could resolve the access issue. And so last year, we, in response to the United Nations declaring this the Decade of Ocean Science, and when they declared it the Decade of Ocean Science with the theme of life below water, there was also a challenge that they put out between civil society, governments, scientists, to come together and to contribute towards preserving life below water. And us as an organization, what we said was, okay, for the next 10 years, we will qualify 10 dive masters across the continent of Africa, so that at the end of this decade, we know that we would have contributed 100 dive masters, whether, you know, it just so happened that last year there was 50% scientists and 50% storytellers, but whether they be scientists or storytellers, but the idea is that there would be 100 dive masters across the continent of Africa contributing towards life, the stories of life below water, contributing towards the making the science about life below water more relatable, more accessible, more relative to the people of Africa. And so last year we threw out this challenge, and there were 10 amazing, powerful women who responded. We always laugh and joke and say that we wouldn't do this again. It was like boot camp, like never before. Maybe it was only because it was COVID that we actually did it that way. But to ask everybody to put their lives on hold for 3 months, to come into some, you know, we are not, especially as Black Africans, we are not water babies. We are not, you know, it's tough. It's grueling to become that, right? And firstly, it's all the culture shock. It's the cold. It's but every day I marvel. I think back and I marvel at these 10 powerful women who really did, you know, really went beyond, over and beyond, in terms of being able to ensure that at the end of those 3 months, they left there as dive masters. a particular interest, a story of particular interest out of this dive lab, and I'd like to share with you is about Nancy. Nancy Araba is a scientist who lives in Tanzania. She is a Nelson Mandela Washington Fellow. She's a NEWF Fellow. She is a wife. She is this absolute dynamo of a woman. And she is passionate, absolutely passionate about the ocean and about preserving the ocean. And I met her in a Zoom last year. And one of the questions, and she was talking so passionately about the ocean and preserving the ocean. And in that Zoom meeting, I asked a question. I said, Nancy, can you swim? And her response was, no, I can't. And I thought to myself, how is it even possible that somebody who hasn't been able to swim can be so passionate? She was doing a master's at that time. Her species of study was the octopus. At that particular time, the world was going crazy about a film called My Octopus Teacher. But what a contrast when you think of the film of My Octopus Teacher, which was beautiful, which won an Oscar, which we are so glad to be associated with, because so much of the story or the side stories of My Octopus Teacher happened at our Congress. Is Nancy, during that period when the world was going crazy about this film, was while she was doing her master's, was paying fishermen in Tanzania to bring her back live octopuses so that she could continue her studies in the laboratory. How much better if Nancy could dive and go down and film? And so I challenged Nancy to apply to our dive lab and to try and learn how to swim before the dive lab. Unfortunately, when she got to us, she couldn't swim yet. And out of those 10 women, there were 2 of them that could not swim. You know, Nancy, as strong as she is, as crazy as she is, she was determined to be a part of it. And she believed that she would be able to swim by the end of it, or even, you know, just after in her mind, she needed just a few more days before she was able to beat the swim test. And so I've asked her permission to share with you the video or what happened after her very first dive. It's okay, watch for yourself.
So back in my home, I've always been vocal in urging people to protect life underwater. But today it was amazing because even for myself, I was experiencing it for the first time. And what I can say is that underwater is beautiful. I'm reaffirming what I've always been saying, what I've always been emphasizing to you and the children and the whole community of Tanzania, that ocean is worth protecting. And today I've been able to be in contact with the coral reefs, in contact with different fish which are very colorful. That was a new whole world. So I don't know what to say today. I'm overwhelmed. This is my first dive of the many others to come, and I can't wait of what lies ahead yet to uncover. But what I can say today, I'm so happy. I'm so overwhelmed. I want to cry, but maybe everyone will never experience these moments. I don't know it. I'm experiencing it in the First World Heritage Site in Solana Bay. This is so special. This is so special. I have many things which I need to improve with my YSC, with my ass having a descent, but what happened today was very special. That's what I can say. It was very special. It's everything which I used to see and what I used to see on the TV. And what I just saw today, it was just incredible. It was just incredible. I think my goal would be that ecosystem is going to protect me. It's like it has fueled me up even 10 times to continue doing what I'm doing, because I had so many times of doubt. Sometimes you want to conserve the ocean, but it's like you look back and say, okay, like what I'm saying is literally really exist. Yeah. But seeing it in your own eyes, seeing it in your own eyes makes it twice worth it. You know, right now I know even when I be speaking, I won't be speaking the same anymore. I'll be speaking out of experience. I'll be speaking because I have seen what's really underwater. I'll be speaking out of knowledge. And I was really excited because last time I was in the cruise of Galas, which of course it wasn't underwater, it was just in the ship. I worked with the sea sponges, and today I just saw them. I just saw them underwater. It looked amazing. Yeah, I just saw them underwater with my own eyes. It's something which I couldn't at all. It's something not even in my wildest dream I could have thought of, you know. Sometimes we like just to imagine like, okay, this is what we see in the books, this is what we see in the TV, then it's like that, but it's a totally different scenario. Seeing like, you know, to me, I don't know, to me it's just emotion. It's just emotion because I feel connected to this ecosystem, but not like any other story. Like since when I was born, I used to go to the ocean. To me, this is luxury. Yeah. It's like NEWF has just opened this new world for me. Yeah, I've always wanted to dive. With the coast, there are so many challenges. So today it's like I've just a dream, and I can try to tell people back home. You know, my organization yesterday was saying, "Have you started diving? Can you have the videos?" So I can imagine how many people will be inspired to go underwater again. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. Every time I have doubts about anything that we do, any time that we think the work that we do is so hard, I always go back to this video, and it reminds me of why we do what we do. It reminds me of why it is so important. Nancy has now become one of the, like I said, she was already one of the greatest advocates for the protection of the ocean. She is now an absolute warrior. She is an absolute, and that's why on the slide, I've got her Instagram and her Facebook. Please follow her. Please follow her. Please see the work that she does. She is a science communicator of note. She totally understands and values the process of the power of communicating your science through storytelling, and it's what she lives for. It's what she tries to do every single day, and so for me, that was the education part that I wanted to talk about, and the connection between education, access, and communicating your science. Now I want to move to from one champion to the next. Now I want to move to storytelling and plastic pollution. And it's linked in a very weird and crazy way, okay, in that back in 2020, the year of COVID, March 2020, April 2020, the world was absolutely, COVID had, arrived, and we were absolutely terrified. We had no idea what this was, where it was going, etc. And lockdown, we as a country went into one of the worst lockdowns known on the planet. And as we were going into lockdown, if some of you remember, when we knew absolutely nothing about COVID, there were 4 French tourists who had left the Kruger National Park. One of them had gone for a COVID test, and instead of waiting for the results, they had left and they went and they continued their holiday, and they went up to St. Lucia. And then this manhunt was taking place across the country for them. and they arrived in St. Lucia, and they were continuing the holiday, but then they were mixing with people in the town of St. Lucia up here in northern KwaZulu-Natal. And then the police arrested him. It was headlines all over the country about you know, the fact that they were there, and you know, there was so much fear. And then the president locked down the country. They were eventually they went back to their home country. They had eventually recovered from COVID. But the last and lasting headlines of St. Lucia was this, or these were one of them, when we had gone into lockdown. But I want to go back to Mamqina, because National Geographic Society had sent out a call at that time across the world to say, since most of the planet is in lockdown, because people can't travel, they were announcing a fund where you could apply to tell a story about COVID and about the, you know, the issues and the challenges around COVID and that kind of stuff. And one of the lasting memories for me in my head was these headlines about St. Lucia. And why it was troubling me particularly is, if you know St. Lucia, it was supposed to be, you know, St. Lucia is towering over the town of St. Lucia, is actually Mapelan, the sand dune Mapelan. It's the highest vegetated sand dune in Africa. It is the beginning of the Isimangaliso Wetland Park. And if you think about the Isimangaliso Wetland Park, it is South Africa's first World Heritage Site. But in actual fact, it was supposed to be, back in the days of apartheid, back before the 1994, those sand dunes, the dunes of the Isimangaliso beaches, were, an agreement had been signed, it was already in place, that those beaches were going to be mined for the black mineral that lies in the titanium that lies in the sand of the beaches of Isimangaliso. Nelson Mandela particularly was lobbied very hard to stop and to reverse those mining rights, and to look at preserving and protecting the beaches and Isimangaliso, you know, for future generations, rather than having it mined. And that's one of the first things that he did as president of South Africa. And so when this headline was the long-lasting headline, I knew that something wasn't right, that it just didn't sit well with me, that a community and a town and people who had turned their back against mining and any sort of so-called riches that mining would bring, and so-called jobs that mining would bring for wildlife tourism, was now going to be completely destroyed, because it was almost the start of whaling season. It was, and everybody knows how, you know, how many tourists come to South Africa and come to St. Lucia particularly because of the whales. And so I have this picture of Mamqina, who is the head, who in our minds is the chief, well, she is the chief storytelling officer of South Africa. Okay, and every time we try and do anything, we go and ask for Mamqina's guidance. She is our NEWF's leader, and we go and we ask her for guidance when it comes to anything around storytelling. And so I said to her, I was telling her the story about St. Lucia, and I said to her, I want to apply to National Geographic Society to do a story about this town, and to show that this town is a lot more than just that COVID won't destroy them, that COVID won't kill them, and that they will rise above all of this. And so she said to me, and I said to her, you know, whale season is about to start. And she said to me, you know, I'll tell you the story about whale. And so this was the lasting memory that I have of St. Lucia. And Mamtrina told me the story about the whale, and it is linked to plastic pollution. And why I want to tell it is because I want to link it back to plastic pollution. Everybody knows that plastic pollution starts on land. Everybody knows that the amount of plastic that's in the ocean comes from the land. Every time we have heavy rains, when we've had the floods, when you see the amount of plastic that goes into the ocean coming as it comes down with the rivers, one of the biggest reasons for all that plastic going from the land into the oceans is the rivers. And it's very often it is because of the activities and communities that live along the rivers. And it's the river pollution that results in such massive plastic pollution in our oceans. And I was telling Mamtrina that I want to do this story, and particularly because when the whales come around this year, there's going to be nobody to greet them. And Mamtrina said to me, I want to tell you a story about what we used to learn as kids growing up. That says, our grandparents always used to say they used to smile when they used to see people, whenever whales used to beach, people would go and cry and put wet cloths on them and try to push them back in the ocean and that kind of stuff. And she says, our elders just used to smile because we knew that that was actually something special that had just happened. She says, because you see, the whales leave Antarctica every year around, I think it's around February, and start making their way up the east coast of Africa. They start making their way up the east coast of Africa because they bring with them every year the promise of life, the promise of rebirth. They come up the east coast of Africa and have their babies as they go up the east coast of Africa. They do that because they know us as Africans, we won't get into boats and come and hunt them. They know that we won't come and kill them. They know that this is who we are. That's what we do as Africans. We don't go out and hunt whales, but we do eat whales if one sacrifices themselves to us. And I was quite surprised by that when she said that. And she said, what happens is, with all these rivers that are entering the ocean, what the elders used to say, and this is the African folklore that Mamtrina was telling me about, what the elders used to teach all the villages and all the communities that lived on the rivers that fed the ocean was that if you look after your rivers, if you take care of them, if you ensure that there's no pollution in them, as the whales come up the east coast of Africa, they will find a community, or a community that needs it most, or the community with the least polluted rivers. That is the place where they will choose, or one of them will choose, to sacrifice themselves to that community. It's a beautiful story in African folklore. And that for me is a so much better story to tell and inspire. You know, they say, and I always quote this from Caitlin Yarnell, who's the Chief Storytelling Officer of National Geographic Society. She has this quote that says, science speaks to the brain, but storytelling speaks to the heart. And if you listen to that particular story as an inspiration and motivation as to why we shouldn't pollute the rivers, then I find that so much more of a compelling way to try and preach the protection of our rivers and hence the protection of our ocean. But why am I linking it to St. Lucia? Was because St. Lucia was going through this particular issue. We were in the middle of COVID. And after Mamtrina told me that story, I went to start the film that we were going to make. And the film was called Beyond the Headlines. I approached a traditional healer in St. Lucia. And I asked her if she could please pay homage to the whales at the beginning of the film. So this is an image of her seated on the beach of Ismangaliso, paying homage in the film to the whales and explaining to them that this time when they come around this year, there will be no boats to meet them. There will be no people to come and celebrate them because COVID has hit this town, because the town has been closed. But she, in the film, she also talks about how we will rise about this, how this too will pass. But she was trying to tell, what she was saying to them was, don't think that we have forsaken you. And so we did this, we shot this, and this particular scene was shot around May of that year. No, I lie, sorry. July, beginning of July of 2020. And you can see Mapelan right in the background. I can't make this up because 3 months later, literally 100 meters from where Angel was sitting, the first whale beaching of the season in 2020 was right there, almost 100 meters from where she was sitting. But 3 months later, when we were doing one of our fellows' film, which was set just behind that sand dune in the community of Sokulu, and the film was called Uwande Lushile, produced by Timbisa Jordan. When we were producing that film, some of the young people, the youngsters who were helping her with the production, were telling us about the hardships during COVID, were telling us about the hardships of how they were struggling as a community during COVID. And one of them said, but we were able to survive because a whale came and sacrificed itself for us. The story that I'm trying to tell you is based in African folklore, but what I'm trying to say is that as Africans, as indigenous knowledge, with our indigenous knowledge systems, we have so much more to contribute to the science and to the stories of protecting the ocean. If we want to inspire communities about protecting the ocean and about stopping plastic pollution, about stopping the pollution of our oceans, we need to find ways to incorporate those stories, the stories of Africa, into the wonder and the beauty that lies underneath the ocean. To close, right, we've got to, and to bring back this thing of we cannot save what we can't see, right? I spoke about the fact that it's about access. Access to the ocean, access to the skills, breaking down the barriers to entry. Using these kind of stories to remind our communities, to remind the people of Africa to reconnect with the ocean, make us fall in love with the ocean, with the stories, with the magic and the wonder that lies beneath, make us fall in love with the beautiful creatures that are underneath, that are in the ocean, make us care, make us reconnect by making it relatable, relevant, and then, okay, if you're going to tell these stories, make it relatable, make it relevant. Let us see ourselves in those stories. Let some young girl in a village somewhere that lives next to the ocean see Nancy and believe that she can be Nancy. And then you weave your conservation messages in there. And then you can use those stories as a call to action to save the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Noel. It's really wonderful to hear about some of the stories that are being shared by NEWF, and thank you to you and to Nancy for sharing that video, and to Nancy for allowing for agreeing for you to share the video. It's really impactful, and completely agree with what you said about sort of the stories that we tell are often far more captivating than the facts that are being shared and things like that. And it's definitely a very important tool that we need to use for any sort of conservation messages and education. And I see we have had one question so far in the Q&A box that says, thank you so much, Noel. Regarding the scarcity of young Black filmmakers working in the ocean, do you think it's only symptomatic of limited access, or are there perhaps also cultural reasons for this?
I think if one looks at the cultural reasons, right, again, it's about access. I like to bring it back to access, okay? Because a lot of the cultural things that are in place, a lot of the stuff that's in place, a lot of the myths, and I don't want to call them myths, sorry, a lot of the practices that our elders have used were all about our protection. If my child can't swim, I'm going to bring some of those cultural practices or some of these stories into place about the ocean in order to protect you, in order to let you not go there because you cannot swim. Because we haven't had access to teaching our kids how to swim. Some of the ocean communities, you know, there are so many ocean communities that have been great divers historically. You know, if you follow an organization in the US called Diving with a Purpose, they tell of stories of during even the slave trade where Africans were particularly sought after, Black Africans were particularly sought after because of their swimming and diving skills. And so a lot of the stuff linked to the cultural stuff is that those who couldn't swim were taught some of the things in order to stop us from going into certain areas. Yes, we use the ocean very much from a cultural and religious perspective as well. But again, most of that is with regards to keeping us safe. So yes, there are some
barriers,
scientists, yes, there are, but there are some scientists, some storytellers, etc., who, if they have had a calling culturally, they need to first go and ask the ancestors permission if they can dive. Without that permission, and there's a process and all of that, and the ancestors will tell them, okay? The ancestors will either give them permission or give them the signs that say, no, you are not allowed to, or no, it is not your time, okay? However, you could still be an ocean advocate. You could still tell the stories of the ocean, just in a different way. But access is primarily, coming back to the question, access is primarily the issue. We have to fix the issue of not being able to swim and the cost of diving, particularly for scientists and filmmakers.
Certainly the access to swimming and sort of safety with regard to water is definitely a very vital element that needs to be addressed. And just a comment on the structure that you took with your program with regard to encouraging the 10 participants to become dive masters as opposed to just doing the diving course was a really a really great initiative, and I mean, it's a great initiative as a whole, but a really great addition to it to sort of increase access going forward, not a case of ticking a box, sort of enabling them going forward and to take that to their communities. Then we have another question here that says, I absolutely love this initiative. Do you find that supporting participants to reach master dive level assisted in granting access to continuity to the project?
Absolutely. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better outcome, you know, with regards to, or we couldn't have been validated more. For example, in the video, Nancy is comforted by Lebo, who's an oceanographer, who is also an ocean scientist. You know, 3 months after that lab, Nancy and Lebo were leading and diving a coral restoration project off the coast of Zanzibar. You can't make this stuff up. that both of them couldn't swim. 3 months after qualifying as dive masters, that's what they were leading. In July of this year, we had what we call a NEWF dive lab, but we had a Tanzanian cohort. And it was 10 divers from Tanzania who were here in South Africa, getting open water and advanced, of Nancy and her organization's initiative. And so she's paying it forward. There were, one of the outcomes of the lab last year was that they needed to develop a concept for a film, which they did during the lab. In July of this year, we supported some of the fellows to go to La Rochelle at one of the big international film markets, sunny side of the dock, to go and pitch this concept about their film. And they were pitching up against a whole lot of other seasoned and experienced filmmakers from around the world. 2 of them were scientists who were up there pitching, and one of them was a filmmaker. They won that pitch. There's so many things that are happening. I mean, I'm just giving you two examples, but there's so much stuff that's happening in terms of how this overcomes the issue of access. And like I say, each of them could take this qualification and go work anywhere in the world. That immediately changes things so considerably for them. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the other things, and one of the things that really makes me excited, is in Kenya, one of our fellows, Dr. Juliet Karisa, she's found that because of the dive master qualification, she's leading so much, and the university is leaning on her so much more, and she's leading so much of the research, because as a dive master, you are able to lead dives. You are able to take other people and other scientists down to dive with you. And so immediately that changes the trajectory of your career. It changes the amount of times you can dive, all of that.
Certainly, and yeah, it's an incredible initiative as a whole, and wonderful to hear that it is making waves, as it were, as the participants go off into the world. I think we're running out of time slightly here, but there are 2 questions that we have here. So the one is, hi Noel, when are you planning to host a storytelling lab, at least for scientists?
I can answer that. We just had one.
Okay. I see.
So one of our labs, or one of the programs that we have, is called Wild Science, and it's aimed at specifically bringing scientists together with a focus on science communication, and trying to attract specifically scientists who want to possibly become self-contained producers and to use visual storytelling as a tool to communicate their science and the work and the research that they are doing. We just had one in partnership with the Conservation Symposium, where they did for 6 months. They were online for most of it with a mentor, and then a week before the symposium, they had during that online process, they had developed a concept for a film. Then came in person in KwaZulu-Natal and produced that film, and then showcased it at the symposium. So yes, we are always, and again, we constantly on the lookout for partners with other organizations or events like the science events, etc., that we can link to make these kind of stories or these kind of labs available to scientists.
Wonderful. And then we have a question in the Q&A box saying, have you considered partnering with any surf schools? There's a local NPO initiative in Algoa Bay that supports teachers and learners and helps teaches them to swim and surf. Collaborating with surf schools might be an interesting development for future projects. I'm not sure if you're aware of any other similar initiatives around the country.
So I'm not aware of this one, but I will definitely look into it as the first part of my answer. And then secondly, a lot of our efforts are aimed at the scientists and filmmakers particularly. And the idea is, if there is a passion or a need to want to, and hence we also do free diving labs. It's not just scuba labs. We also do free diving labs, but it's focused specifically on storytelling as well, storytelling and or supporting research. So that's where why we haven't maybe reached out, but we're also happy for a lot of these kind of organizations to say, hey, at your next lab, please come and look at some of our candidates. Or how do we our contact details are up on screen. Always be on the lookout, follow our page. That kind of stuff, because there's constantly labs and initiatives coming up. And if you know of somebody that really needs something to help them get to that next level, etc., even please reach out to us directly. We have a connected network of fellows all across Africa. Right now we have 127 across 26 countries in Africa, and it's growing by the day. And we're always on the lookout to try and make this try and make this community as inclusive as possible.
Certainly. I see there has been another question that's come through now saying, I see there are a few coming through now, saying, thanks so much for the talk. Have you thought of having dive centers in different parts of Africa to provide more access?
One of the things that we're very careful about is, even though one of our major programs is a collaboration with National Geographic Society called Africa Refocused, and even though a lot of our fellows come, as I said already, by the end of next year, we would like to have a presence and a community in every country in Africa. We are not only a dive labs is just one of the things that we do. It's cinematography, it's wild science, it's producer labs, it's composer labs. So the dive stuff is just one of the things that we do. We do not want to, Africa is a continent, not a country. And so we do not want to be creating NEWFs all across Africa. There are 5 sub-regions of Africa that the United Nations has declared, and we want to find more partners in those different 5, in the 5 sub-regions. So we're happier to partner and support, like we did, like I said, with Nancy and them's organization. Unfortunately, we had to bring them down to South Africa to do the diving, because it's 10 times, even with the flight, it's cheaper to bring them here than to host it in their home country. It's crazy even to say that.
And then there's a question saying, have you had any barriers or challenges with linking science versus indigenous knowledge, particularly in rural areas?
I don't think you'll have problems in rural areas. I think you might have more problems in the science areas. And I think it's, a lot of people call it indigenous knowledge systems. I like to call it indigenous knowledge science. And I think I'd like to appeal to a lot of scientists to seriously consider the tried and trusted methods and observations that our people have been carrying out for so many years. And I use those words particularly, tried, trusted observations, because very often that's what science is about. And, so that's where indigenous knowledge systems come from. That's why it should be called indigenous knowledge science. And I think the collaboration of that And the more that we have of that, the easier and the better and the quicker we're going to break down any barriers surrounding these issues.
Thank you so much, Noel. I see that we've gone a little bit over time, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to share some of these stories and the impact that NEWF is having. I have shared the link that you mentioned earlier for the video that you spoke about earlier in the presentation. Yes, Pufumla, and the link for that is in the chat box here, and we encourage you all to go take a look at that. The link will also be included in the YouTube caption for the recording here, so you can find it again later if you aren't able to watch it now. But for now, I think we're going to close off the session here, just as I'm sure people have other pressing things that they'll need to get to, including Noel. But thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today, and a special thank you, Noel, for taking the time to put together your presentation and for joining us today and sharing all these insights.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you all next year, everyone. And for now, yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day.